The SU-30 has finally made its way into War Thunder, and the sim community could not be more pleased. Well, at least one half. US mains are already on the forums complaining about this thing because, of course, they are. The question on everyone's lips right now is, like, is the SU-30 good enough to finally bring balance to top tier air sim, right? This is a topic that I've been covering for the past year or so on my channel, and I've sort of accidentally kind of built like a bit of a community around it as well. Like a whole group of people that just hate US mains for like the way they play a video game, dude. It's actually kind of insane when you think about it, but nonetheless, the plane is finally here. For Russia finally have a top tier vehicle now that I think you could consider to be on par with the things that it's up against. Now, sure, it does some things worse than the other vehicles, but it also does other things better than the things it goes up against, and that's what you call balance in my book, right? Now, the biggest problem that the Su-27 has had was always its radar, right? You get a very limited selection of scan patterns. Actually, I think you only get the one scan pattern and that's it. There's no auto tracker in TWS mode for the elevation, so you have to manually keep adjusting it, or if you don't use manual elevation adjustment, you just have to keep pointing your nose at the target. And then there's, of course, the refresh rate, which was absolutely abysmal. Meaning that sometimes when you had one target and you kind of knew where they were, you could get the radar to cooperate with you if you did certain things. You could use the HMD or whatever. The problem is with the slow refresh rate, when there's like more than one target, well, you just need to scan that area real quick to see if something's over there, right? Because sim doesn't get any markers or anything, so radars play a much bigger role in this game mode. It was just kind of terrible. It was more of like a targeting radar than any kind of search radar, right? And that's how you sort of had to think of it, and that's how I think most flanker players ended up using it if they actually ended up spending or committing a bit of time to the plane. And I think this is why so many people, or so many Russian players in particular, were so excited about this plane, because finally we're getting a flanker variant that can actually kind of dogfight, but it also gets a good radar. And it's not just a good radar, this is a really good radar. If you've ever played the MiG-29 SMT or the J-10A, for instance, it's a very similar radar. It's not exactly the same, but you know how War Thunder sort of models these things. It's basically the same thing. You get 8 data link tracks, meaning that you can launch up to 8, or launch and guide up to 8 missiles at once. Compared to the MiG-29's, I think it's 4 that it gets, something like that. So yeah, a slight upgrade there, but you get the insane gimbal limit as well, which I think is like 81 degrees or something, so it's almost like you can almost be sitting directly in the notch while still guiding your missile in. So that's a very good thing. The refresh rate's also really good. Scan angles are pretty decent as well. I'm not going to say it's the best radar in the game right now, because I think that is a bit up for debate, but it is definitely a contender. It also just gives you the ability to point the radar in like an area and just scan that whole area to see if there's any targets or threats in there or anything like that, right? And if you're like an American player and you're thinking to yourself right now, well, duh, that's how radars work, bro. Not the Su-27's radar. Nah. Russian players have never really had this capability of just revealing whatever's in front of you on any kind of decent airframe, right? Now, you couple this with the R-77-1 as well, which is the new radar-guided missile that this thing gets. Now, it's obviously, well, as far as I know, it is just basically an R-77. It's the one that you're used to on the Su-27SM. But it gets a little bit of extra fuel in the motor, so it burns for a little bit longer, it goes a little bit faster, flies a little bit further. In terms of range, I think it has around about the same range as an AMRAAM, although it does get to its target a little bit faster, but it also bleeds a little bit more speed whenever it starts turning than the AMRAAM. So, pick and choose whichever you prefer or whatever. Well, I mean, you can't pick and choose because you only pick the one missile on the one airframe, of course, but yeah, the Russians have something that's kind of on par with the AMRAAM now, and I think, to be honest with you, I would actually say the R-77-1 is better than the AMRAAM, because just having that high off ball sight capability, I was playing some American planes like recently before the patch dropped, because it's the first time in months I could actually find decent games for American planes. And I gotta say, I like the AMRAAM, I like how far it flies, I like its speed, stuff like that, blah blah blah. But I do kind of miss just being able to fire it off, like 60 degrees off center axis, as I'm sort of trying to ambush someone that's about to cross over a mountain or something like that. So you just can't do that stuff with the AMRAAM, right? You can with the R77 or with any of the other active radar guided homing missiles, to be honest. But now that you have one that can do that, and it also flies as far as the AMRAAM, I think would make the R77-1 the best Fox 3 missile in the game right now, in my opinion. But of course we also need to factor in the launch platform here, so while the missiles are kinematically quite close to each other, the planes are not. The Su-30, if you, let's just say, take the time to accelerate up to Mach 1.2 in a slight climb, if you took that same amount of time and you did it in an F-15E, for instance, you'd probably be around Mach 1.5. Same thing with the Eurofighter, same thing with the Rafale. And of course, at those kind of speeds, the AMRAAM is going to fly a little bit faster than your R77-1, or a little bit further, I should say, just because, you know, the F-15 is going to be launching it at a much higher speed than you are in your Su-30, so that is something that you need to consider. But high altitude, long range BVR fights they're not really going to work that well against experienced players anyway, so in which case, if you're low on the deck, where most aircraft are generally doing the same kind of speed anyway, it's just acceleration that matters, yeah, I would take the R77-1 over the AMRAAM any day of the week. Another thing that's really worth mentioning about this plane as well is that you get a huge amount of missiles as well. You get to carry 12 R77-1s as well as 2 R73 Archers alongside them. You can go for the 4 R73s and carry 10 R77-1s. You can also, you know, sacrifice a further 2 R77s and instead take R27 ETs, for instance. My preferred loadout is 4 R73s and 10 R77-1s. Sometimes I'll also go for 12 R77s. It kind of depends on which way the match is going. You can also go for the ETs, although I'm not the greatest fan of ETs. I can never really seem to make them work for me, but I have seen other people make them work for them, so, you know, you do you. My point is, you have a absolute metric load of missiles, and even when you fire off half of all of your missiles on board, you still have more missiles left on your plane than the F-16 does when it's taken off. Just think about that. During yesterday's play session, I've also frequently found myself running out of fuel before I've actually run out of missiles in the Su-30, so that is something that, you know, don't be afraid to spam missiles a little bit. Just, you know, make sure that you're not spamming them towards friendlies. Speaking of friendly identification, the radar on this thing can actually identify what plane it's tracking, right? So you can see this on the little MFD screen in the bottom. When you're tracking an F-15, for instance, it actually says it's an F-15 that you're tracking. This can be quite helpful for a number of reasons. However, it's also supposed to show up in the heads-up display in front, and as far as I know, I believe it does in RB, but not in Sim for some reason, which is weird because RB is the third-person game mode and Sim's the first-person game mode, and it's not working in the first-person game mode where you would actually see it. So I don't know what's going on there. Bug report has been made. If I remember, I'll put it in the description so you can go upvote it or whatever. But yeah, hopefully that does get fixed fairly soon. So as you can see, this thing does get a very, very good kit indeed. But what about the airframe that it's mounted on? Now, earlier in the video, I did allude to the Russians now finally have a good radar kit, good missiles, all of that, on something that actually has decent flight performance. And to be honest with you, the flight model is decent, but it's not amazing. Here's the thing, all of the other 14.0 aircraft, the Eurofighter, the Rafale, the F-15E, they all get this like turbo mode engine performance, where they can accelerate from a standstill on the runway to like Mach 1 in like half a minute or something ridiculous like that, right? Whereas the Su-30 is still stuck with the old flanker engine. So that's not the Su-27SM, it's the original Su-27 that sits at 13.3. Those old engines are put into this airframe, which by the way is 2.5 tons heavier than the Su-27SM. So straight off the bat there, you have worse flight performance than the previous plane in the tech tree. This thing obviously also has thrust vectoring, which, you know, I'm sure everyone knows what it is by now, but I guess I'll explain it. It's when the actual nozzles of the engine can kind of pivot and turn in different directions, which push the plane, turn the plane in different directions, rather than just relying on the aerodynamic, you know, flight surfaces to sort of do it. The advantage here is that you're going to be able to maneuver the plane even when you're at very, very low air speeds and there isn't enough air actually going over the wing surface in order to control the plane, right? The problem here is, of course, that while you can point the nose wherever you want, if you're at low speed, you're still not going to produce any lift. So you can be pointing the nose directly up in the sky, but you're still going to be falling down towards the ground, and that's something that you're just going to have to, I think, get used to. And I think more experienced players are going to adapt to this quite quick. The less experienced players, I think, are going to have a real hard time with this plane at slow speeds, especially when you're dogfighting, doing rolling scissors, or even if you're fighting something that has like a bit of an energy advantage over you, which is probably going to happen quite often, to be honest with you, because this thing just dumps its energy after like the first turn. It's very comparable to something like the F-15C. I think it might be a bit worse. I'm not 100% certain on that, but it's definitely not the top dogfighter. And the thrust vectoring kind of, it's a little bit of a crutch in that sense, right? The best way to think about it is if it didn't have thrust vectoring, it would be a very mediocre dogfighter at best. With the thrust vectoring, it's still a mediocre dogfighter, but whenever you do bleed all of your speed or whatever, you can do the funny, you know, point the nose wherever, which can catch people off guard. You know, don't get me wrong there. And if you have some altitude, this is actually a really dangerous plane to go up against. The problem here is, though, I think in reality, if you do get to the merge nowadays at top tier, likelihood is that you're on the ground because somebody's been multipathing or something like that, and you don't have that much altitude to play with, right? People don't generally merge up at 20,000 feet like in a Growling Sidewinder video, where it's just, you know, the thrust vectoring plane essentially just wins because he can just fall out the sky forever and point his nose wherever he wants to, right? In most cases, you're not going to be able to have that luxury with the thrust vectoring. However, if you play your cards right, you can get 1 or 2 good turns in that might actually win you the fight. You just need to be careful with it and pick your moments. I gotta admit at this point as well, when it comes to the whole dogfighting aspect of this plane, it's the part that I'm the most uncertain of. Flankers are generally quite complicated planes to fly, especially when it comes to dogfighting, just because of the super maneuverability that they have, which leave you with a lot of options, but they can also mess you up pretty badly if you employ them at the wrong time. And I think the skill comes into just knowing when to overpull the nose and stuff like that and go for the shot. It's just the planes are a little bit harder to fly than what most people are used to, I think. And then you add the thrust vectoring on as well. I think it's just going to take time for people to find like the optimum way to fly this. Kind of like how when the Su-27 got added way back when, a lot of people really weren't sure of it. I mean, I think I made like 3 or 4 videos on it as well, because I kept changing my mind on it and learning new things about it and stuff like that. So we might have like a similar thing with this plane as well. So these are still very much my first impressions. Don't take any of this as like being set in stone, but I do believe that this plane is in a pretty good spot. It's not overpowered, but it's also not terrible. And as long as you don't really do the dogfighting or, you know, do the super long range high altitude BVR game or whatever, if you just do the regular, you know, you fly around, use your radar to find people and fire missiles at them like what most sort of sim games are nowadays, it's actually a really good plane to do that with. It's in reality, on paper it might have some weaknesses, but in reality it actually ends up working out quite well. It's the same thing with the thrust vectoring, for instance, right? Yes, it's a thing that if you're up against a good player and he plays it absolutely perfectly and he knows how to play around your nose and sort of stays above you and stuff like that when you're at low altitude and whatever, runs you out of energy and eventually will run you into the ground. Those kind of fights don't really happen all that often in an actual EC match, right? They happen in one-on-one duels because it's like a controlled environment. You all start on like the same fuel load, you have like minimal rocket and missiles on board, stuff like that. And you're prepared, you know, you do it a couple of rounds and you're sort of dialed in and everyone's sort of playing the plane how it's supposed to be played. And then, yeah, I can understand it's kind of easy to beat this, but in an actual fight, like in an actual EC match where you merge, you have different fuel loads, you have different weapon loads on, different weight, being able to just pull the nose round whenever you want, you can do it a couple times as well, obviously depending on how high above the ground you are, it's actually, it's a really nice advantage to have. And I think it's one of those things whereas on paper it looks a bit, I don't know, man, but in reality it actually ends up working out quite well. So I do definitely recommend you grind this plane out. If you have Russia sort of at top tier or anywhere near top tier, I definitely recommend it's you know, it's definitely worth it. Very fun plane to fly. I do like the cockpit as well. You do end up getting quite good visibility out the back as well, despite it being a 2-seater. And especially if you've flown the previous flankers like the SU-27 SM or whatever, I think this, even with this slight performance hit, I think you're still going to enjoy this thing very, very much. So, in summary, how should you play this thing? Well, try to avoid dogfights. It is top tier. If you happen to find yourself in them, you don't have terrible cards, but it's not a situation you want to be in because this thing does get quite slow quite quickly, and it leaves you open to third parties and stuff like that. I generally fly in dampening mode because I find that this flanker in particular without dampening mode is almost impossible to fly. It is so bloody twitchy, and I obviously play on a controller as well, so dampening just makes it a little bit easier for me. I have the AOA limiter turned off at all times. I haven't really run into any stability issues or anything as of yet, so I don't really see a reason to keep it on. I also take 30 minutes of fuel. You know, I take about 3 or 4 minutes to sort of, you know, take off, get to where I want to go, get up to speed, and then fire off a couple of R77s in the general direction of the enemy, hopefully get some kills, and then hopefully by the time I get to my first merge, I'm at like 20 minutes of fuel kind of. So yeah, and then when it comes to the actual playstyle, I mean, you know, maybe don't go high altitude BVRing just because you do lack a bit of the engine performance up there, but you know, you stick to medium altitude, stick fairly low, maybe not too far away from cover, stick in the mountains of course, and try and ambush people. This thing does still do, you know, regular SU-27 things. Regular flanker gameplay is going to work absolutely perfectly with this thing. You just now have the option to also try other ways of dealing with your enemies now with the radar kit that you have. But other than that, guys, I know my upload schedule has been, well, terrible recently, I will admit, but you know, sometimes you just need to take some breaks from certain games, and I'm really excited to come back now. I've been playing the game for the past week or so on and off, and I've really been enjoying it again. So yeah, I'm going to get through the other planes. The next video will probably be on the J11B, might be on the F-18, I don't know yet honestly, but one of those two definitely. If you're interested in like what controls I use an Xbox controller. I made a controls tutorial, which I'm going to link in the description if you're interested in that. If you're interested in joining a Discord server of like-minded sim individuals like yourself, and you know, link to that is also in the description as well. So, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.